Today, we step into an emotionally charged story about prejudice, resilience, and unexpected transformation. It begins with Colonel Nathaniel Carter, a seasoned black officer in the U.S. Army who is on his way home after years of service to his country. Holding a first-class ticket in his hand, he looks forward to a peaceful flight, a small reward for his dedication and sacrifices. But instead, he finds himself confronted with blatant prejudice from a wealthy and influential passenger named Vivian Hartley. The tension on the flight becomes not only a test of Nathaniel's composure and dignity, but also the catalyst for a chain of events that will forever change the lives of both individuals. What is it about Nathaniel's actions in such a challenging moment that creates such profound ripples? And will Vivian come to understand the lesson hidden behind her arrogance? Stay tuned to uncover this powerful and unexpected story. If you're drawn to lessons about strength and transformation, don't forget to hit the subscribe button so you don't miss any of the action. If you were in Nathaniel's position, how do you think you'd react? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Nathaniel Carter, a black colonel in the U.S. Army, approached the first-class check-in counter with a calm and steady demeanor. His black suitcase rolled effortlessly behind him, the sound of its wheels blending into the bustling symphony of the airport. Everything about today felt different, the relief of leaving conflict zones behind and the hope of soon reuniting with his family. In front of him stood a short line of travelers. Leading the queue was an older woman, impeccably dressed in a classic tweed coat and expensive high heels. Vivian Hartley, a lady of wealth and privilege, casually swung her Chanel handbag over her arm, exuding an air of absolute confidence. Her gaze wandered the room before it landed on Nathaniel. Her eyes moved past him briefly, but then returned, lingering on the details: his sharp suit, the small military insignia on his lapel, and his dark skin. She turned back slowly, tilting her head slightly, her eyes narrowing with a challenging look. "You're in the wrong line," she said, her tone laced with condescension. Nathaniel hesitated for a split second but quickly regained his composure. "No, ma'am. This is the first-class check-in line, isn't it?" His voice was polite yet unwavering. Vivian smirked, letting out a short, dismissive laugh. "Yes, but I don't think everyone realizes that." Her voice dropped slightly, as though she wanted only the two of them to hear. "I mean, someone like you, how could you possibly?" Nathaniel met her gaze directly, his face calm but firm. "If you're questioning whether I belong here, ma'am, my ticket should clear up any confusion," he replied, holding it up for her to see. Nathaniel looked directly at her, his eyes sharp, yet his tone remained courteous. "I don't believe I owe you any explanation, ma'am, but my ticket is right here," he said, holding up the first-class ticket in his hand. A tense silence hung between them. Vivian raised an eyebrow, her expression skeptical. "I don't know who paid for that ticket," she said, stepping back slightly to look him up and down, "but it's unusual." Nathaniel didn't respond. He simply stepped forward as the airline staff called his name. Handing over his ticket and passport, he kept his voice steady. "Nathaniel Carter. First class." The attendant quickly scanned his information, then smiled and nodded. "Welcome, Mr. Carter. Your ticket is confirmed. Thank you for your service in the military." Every word seemed to sting Vivian's pride. She turned abruptly, her expression a mixture of anger and discomfort. "Well, isn't that surprising?" she exclaimed loudly, her sarcasm thinly veiled. "You don't often see a military man in first class." Nathaniel turned back to face her, his gaze firm, his tone calm but resolute. "I suppose today is a special day for both of us, ma'am." The attendant at the counter, sensing the tension, quickly stepped in to defuse the situation. "Mrs. Hartley, the first-class lounge is ready for you. Allow me to escort you there." Vivian didn't move immediately, her expression cold. "How fascinating," she said icily. "It looks like we'll be sharing the first-class cabin. I do hope you'll know how to conduct yourself properly." Nathaniel tilted his head slightly, a faint smile on his lips, though his eyes didn't waver from hers. "I've learned how to conduct myself in far more stressful situations. I'm sure I'll manage just fine." With a sharp huff, Vivian turned on her heel, the sound of her high heels echoing loudly on the polished floor as she strode away. The tension in the air lingered. Nathaniel bent down to pick up his bag, maintaining his outward composure, though he couldn't help but reflect on the woman's demeanor. He had encountered looks like hers before on the battlefield, in high-stakes meetings, and now here, at an airport check-in counter. As Vivian made her way toward the lounge, She continued whispering to a nearby flight attendant, insinuating that Nathaniel wasn't trustworthy. Nathaniel heard the whispers but chose to ignore them. He stepped into the lounge, its luxurious atmosphere doing little to ease the simmering tension between them. Colonel Nathaniel Carter's journey had begun with a tense confrontation at the check-in counter, where deep-seated prejudices had quickly come to the surface. But this was just the beginning of a series of challenges awaiting him. Would Nathaniel's dignity and composure withstand the storm that was brewing? Don't miss the next chapter, where the conflict intensifies and true values are put to the test. Let us know your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned for the next part of the story. The first-class lounge was a tranquil and luxurious space, with plush leather chairs, warm golden lighting, and the gentle strains of classical music filling the air. Nathaniel Carter stepped in, carefully hanging his coat on a hook near the entrance before finding a secluded corner to sit. He wasn't looking for attention, just a quiet moment to enjoy before the flight, but fate seemed unwilling to grant him peace. Mere minutes later, Vivian Hartley entered, a champagne flute in hand, freshly served by the staff. Her gaze swept the room and quickly landed on Nathaniel. A subtle smirk played on her lips before she made her way to a seat conspicuously close to him, settling down just a few steps away. Nathaniel immediately sensed her presence but pretended not to notice, keeping his eyes fixed on his phone screen. Vivian, however, wasn't inclined to leave him in peace. Taking a deliberate sip of champagne, she lowered the glass, the faint clink of crystal against the glass table resonating in the quiet lounge. "I thought the first-class lounge would be more selective," she said, her voice loud enough for Nathaniel to hear. Nathaniel looked up, his eyes calm but with a subtle edge of frost. "I thought so too," he replied evenly, his tone steady but cutting. "But it turns out people can pay their way in here, regardless of their attitude." Vivian raised an eyebrow, visibly surprised by his response. She wasn't used to being challenged, especially by someone she considered beneath her. "Really? I suppose you can pay your way in, but culture isn't something money can buy," she said, emphasizing the last words. Nathaniel met her gaze squarely, his expression unchanging. "You're right. Culture isn't bought. It's built through experience, education, and respect. It seems some people still have a long way to go." Nathaniel's words hit Vivian's pride like a well-placed blow. She straightened in her seat, setting her champagne flute down on the table with a louder-than-necessary clink. "Do you even know who I am?" Vivian asked, her voice low but brimming with thinly veiled threat. "I've traveled the world, mingled with the most important figures. I know what standards are, and I can tell you you don't belong here." Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. His face remained composed, but his tone carried a sharper edge. I don't need to know who you are. But I know exactly who I am and where I belong. Instead of worrying about me, perhaps you should focus on enjoying your flight." Vivian's eyes narrowed, the tension between them thickening the air. Yet Nathaniel remained steadfast, unshaken by her attempts to rattle him. The surrounding passengers, who had been quietly reading or working, began to take notice. Their gazes shifted between Vivian and Nathaniel, their expressions a mix of curiosity and discomfort. A flight attendant, Grace Morgan, who had witnessed the earlier exchange at the check-in counter, stepped forward. She leaned slightly, her voice calm and soothing as she tried to diffuse the tension. "Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Carter, we hope you can enjoy the lounge comfortably. If there's anything we can do to assist, please don't hesitate to let us know." Vivian turned to Grace, her eyes flashing with restrained fury. "Assist? If you want to assist, why don't you move this colonel to somewhere more appropriate? This lounge isn't for just anyone who happens to buy a first-class ticket, you understand." Grace's face momentarily paled, but she quickly regained her composure. "Mr. Carter is our valued guest and has every right to access the lounge. If there's any issue, we would regretfully need to notify the captain about inappropriate behavior." Nathaniel gave a faint smile, his eyes locked on Vivian. "She's absolutely right, ma'am. If you'd like to file a complaint, I'll be happy to wait for the captain's invitation." Vivian stood abruptly, gripping the handle of her handbag tightly. Her composure, once so poised, had slipped away. "You think you can mock me like this without facing consequences? I have connections you couldn't even imagine. We don't let people like you run unchecked in spaces meant for the upper echelon." Nathaniel leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. His voice was low, but there was a sharpness to it that cut through the room. "You can say whatever you want, ma'am, but remember this, your words also come with a price. I'm not afraid to defend my honor on the battlefield or in this lounge." The lounge fell into a stunned silence. Vivian glared at Nathaniel for a long moment before turning sharply on her heel, her footsteps echoing louder than before as she stormed away. But it was clear to everyone she wasn't done yet. Nathaniel leaned back in his seat, taking a deep breath to steady himself. Grace approached him gently, placing a comforting hand on his shoulder. "Are you all right, sir?" she asked, her eyes filled with empathy. Nathaniel nodded. "I'm fine. This isn't the first time I've dealt with someone like her, and it probably won't be the last." Grace offered him a small, reassuring smile. "We're very sorry this happened. We'll keep an eye on her to ensure she doesn't cause any further trouble." As Vivian exited the lounge, her eyes gleamed with anger and spite. She had already decided this wasn't just a small confrontation. She would find a way to retaliate. Nathaniel, meanwhile, knew this storm was far from over. But he had steeled himself for whatever might come next. As the boarding announcement for first-class passengers echoed through the terminal, Nathaniel Carter rose to his feet, adjusting his blazer before making his way to the boarding gate. As one of the first invited to board, in line with first-class protocol, he ascended the jet bridge, feeling the warm, inviting air of the cabin where plush, wide leather seats awaited. Nathaniel quickly located his assigned seat 2A by the window, a perfect spot for peace and quiet. He stowed his carry-on in the overhead compartment, settled into his seat, and pulled a book from his bag. For a brief moment, everything seemed calm. That peace was shattered less than 5 minutes later, when a familiar voice broke through the quiet. "Really? I can't believe I have to sit next to you." The voice of Vivian Hartley dripped with indignation. Nathaniel looked up to see Vivian standing a few steps away, staring at him as if he were a stain on her silk gown. Her seat, 2 billion, was directly next to his. Vivian turned to a nearby flight attendant, Jake Thompson, signaling him with an exasperated gesture. "Can you do something about this? I can't sit next to him." Jake, a seasoned flight attendant, maintained a professional smile. "Mrs. Hartley, I'm afraid all the seats have been pre-assigned and we can't make any changes at this time." Vivian narrowed her eyes at Nathaniel before turning back to Jake. "I'm sure you can see this arrangement is unsuitable. If you don't do something, I'll have to escalate this to the airline." Jake glanced at Nathaniel, who remained composed. "Ma'am, I understand your concerns, but I assure you we'll do everything to make your flight as comfortable as possible." Nathaniel gave Jake a small, reassuring smile. "It's fine. I don't think she'll cause any more trouble." His words, though polite, only added fuel to the fire. Vivian inhaled sharply, grabbed her handbag, and sat down in the seat beside him with obvious reluctance. As the plane took off, the tension in the first-class cabin was palpable. Nathaniel tried to focus on the book in his hands, but the muttered remarks from Vivian were loud enough for him to hear. "I can't believe it. Letting just anyone in here. It's completely ruining the standards." Nathaniel placed his book down on his lap, turning to face her. His expression was calm, but his tone carried an unmistakable firmness. "Mrs. Hartley, if you have something to say to me, I suggest you say it directly rather than muttering under your breath." Vivian whipped her head around to face him, her cheeks flushing red. "I don't need to explain myself to you. But let me make this clear, I don't think you belong here. First class isn't meant for people like you." Nathaniel let out a soft chuckle, his voice low and resolute. "And I think first class shouldn't be a haven for people filled with prejudice either." Their exchange quickly drew the attention of nearby passengers. Some glanced over with confusion, while others were clearly trying to eavesdrop on the escalating tension. Grace Morgan, the lead flight attendant, hurried over in an attempt to calm the situation. "Mrs. Hartley, Mr. Carter, it seems there's been a misunderstanding. We want to ensure both of you feel comfortable on this flight." Vivian pointed sharply at Nathaniel. "A misunderstanding? He's the one making me uncomfortable. I don't see why I have to put up with this." Grace turned to Nathaniel. "Mr. Carter, would you like to switch seats? We can make arrangements if it helps ensure a more peaceful flight." Nathaniel shook his head firmly. "That won't be necessary. I don't think my seat is the issue here. I paid for this seat and I have every right to remain in it." Vivian let out a derisive laugh, her tone dripping with contempt. How arrogant. Grace leaned closer to Vivian, her voice calm but firm. Mrs. Hartley, if you continue to cause a disturbance, I'll have no choice but to report this to the captain. This is a commercial flight, and all passengers are treated equally. Vivian went silent for a moment, clearly weighing her options. Eventually, she crossed her arms and turned to face the window, though the tension in the air remained palpable. Throughout the flight, Vivian continued her attempts to provoke Nathaniel, from veiled remarks to purposefully spilling water near him. Yet Nathaniel maintained his composure, refusing to engage. His focus stayed on his book, an impenetrable wall of calm amidst her provocations. As the plane began its descent, Vivian leaned in close to Nathaniel, her voice cold and deliberate. Do you think this ends here? I'll make sure you pay for your arrogance. Nathaniel met her gaze, his tone steady but firm. Mrs. Hartley, I've faced threats far greater than anything you could ever muster. Do what you feel you must, but don't expect me to back down. When the plane finally docked at the gate, Vivian stormed off with a face full of anger, while Nathaniel calmly gathered his belongings. But he knew her threats weren't idle. A storm was brewing, and he would need to prepare for whatever came next. The confrontation between Nathaniel and Vivian on the flight had not only drawn the attention of the passengers but also stirred deeper, underlying societal tensions. Would Vivian stop at her cutting remarks, or would her anger erupt into something more calculated? Nathaniel's journey on this fateful flight was just beginning. Don't miss the next developments, where the truth will come to light, and the resilience of a soldier will face its ultimate test. Share your thoughts in the comments and stay tuned. Vivian Hartley strode out of the airport, her face set in a steely expression, her eyes burning with determination and spite. In her mind, someone like Nathaniel Carter challenging her and humiliating her in public was an unforgivable affront. Her simmering anger quickly morphed into a driving force as she began plotting her revenge. Vivian was no ordinary woman. She was a prominent figure in elite circles with close connections spanning the business world and the military. As soon as she climbed into the back of her limousine leaving the airport, she pulled out her phone and dialed a trusted contact, General Albert Green, a high-ranking officer stationed at the Pentagon. General Green, she began, her tone smooth but laden with meaning. I need a small favor. Albert Green, who had known Vivian for years, recognized the undertone in her voice immediately. Something serious was brewing. What's going on, Vivian? How can I help? She recounted the incident, weaving her tale with exaggerated claims and deliberate distortions. In her version, Nathaniel was a rude, disrespectful man who had made her feel threatened. I can't believe someone like him holds the rank of colonel, she concluded, her voice dripping with theatrical outrage. He's not fit to represent our military. Albert paused for a moment, considering her words. All right, I'll look into it. You said his name is Nathaniel Carter, she replied without hesitation. I'm certain he must have some issues in his record. We need to teach him a lesson about respecting women. 2 days after the flight, Nathaniel received an email from the Army Command Office summoning him to report for a review regarding an incident involving alleged misconduct while on duty. Frowning as he read the email, Nathaniel immediately recognized this as the fallout from Vivian's threats. With years of experience in the military, he understood all too well how even baseless accusations could tarnish a soldier's reputation and career. Closing his laptop, Nathaniel leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. He knew he was facing a battle not fought with weapons, but with influence and perception of fighting. Nathaniel arrived at the command office on base, meticulously prepared. He entered the conference room where a panel of 3 senior officers was already waiting. On the table lay a detailed report about the flight in question. General Robert Hayes, the head of the panel, opened the meeting with a stern expression. Colonel Carter, we've received a formal complaint regarding your conduct on a recent flight. Please present the events from your perspective. Nathaniel met their gazes steadily, recounting the incident with clarity and honesty. He described how Vivian Hartley had repeatedly insulted, provoked, and threatened him, emphasizing that he had maintained his composure throughout the flight and had done nothing to escalate the situation. When he finished, General Hayes furrowed his brow. We've also received a conflicting report from Mrs. Hartley, alleging that you made rude and threatening remarks toward her. Nathaniel replied confidently, Sir, I believe there is evidence that will exonerate me. Other passengers or even the flight crew might be willing to testify. Coincidentally, during the very meeting, a video from the flight began circulating widely on social media. Lisa Daniels, a first-class passenger, had recorded the entire altercation between Nathaniel and Vivian. The footage clearly showed Vivian initiating the confrontation, hurling insults, and escalating the conflict. The hashtag #JusticeForCarter quickly began trending, with thousands rallying behind Nathaniel. The growing public pressure forced the military to conduct a thorough review of the case. Grace Morgan, the lead flight attendant from the flight, was called in to testify. In her statement, she confirmed that Nathaniel had remained calm throughout the ordeal and that Vivian was the one who pushed the situation too far. "I've worked in the airline industry for over 10 years," Grace told the panel. "Colonel Carter is one of the most polite and respectful passengers I've ever served. This incident was in no way his fault." With undeniable evidence now on the table, Vivian Hartley's credibility crumbled. The public backlash against her was swift and severe. Her insults and threats not only harmed Nathaniel but also exposed her arrogance and discriminatory behavior. Several organizations she had supported financially severed ties with her to avoid association with the controversy. Nathaniel, fully exonerated, was officially cleared of any wrongdoing. Still, he knew this wasn't the end. He faced a decision whether to confront Vivian directly and seek accountability for her actions or take the higher road and use this experience to foster meaningful change. As he left the room, the weight of vindication mixed with the lingering question of how best to move forward. As the video from the flight continued to spread, all eyes turned to Vivian Hartley. On social media, the hashtag #JusticeForCarter kept gaining momentum, with thousands of people condemning her actions. Scathing comments flooded every post about the incident, including, "People like Hartley don't deserve a seat in first class, let alone in modern society. Colonel Carter is a hero. It's tragic that individuals like her still exist." The uproar wasn't confined to social media. News outlets, from local papers to major networks, began covering the story. An article in the New York Times boldly pointed out how Vivian's behavior reflected deep-rooted prejudices in elite circles. Colonel Carter's story is more than just an in-flight incident. It's a stark reminder of the discrimination that persists in our society, even in spaces that are supposed to represent sophistication and progress. Vivian hadn't anticipated the magnitude of the fallout. Within days, organizations and elite clubs she was associated with began to publicly distance themselves from her. One of the biggest blows came from the Golden Foundation, a charity she had donated millions to, which announced it was severing all ties with her. Emily Walters, the foundation's executive director, addressed the decision in a press conference. "We cannot condone any behavior that contradicts our core values of fairness and equality for all. Mrs. Hartley's actions do not represent our organization." Additionally, a prominent fashion brand that had partnered with Vivian issued a statement ending their collaboration, further damaging her public image. Meanwhile, Nathaniel Carter returned to his normal routine, though the incident had a profound impact on his life. He received hundreds of invitations for interviews from media outlets, nonprofit organizations, and public events. Yet he maintained his characteristic discretion, not rushing to capitalize on the unexpected attention. During a conversation with his superior, General Robert Hayes, the general offered him some guidance. "Carter, you've been given a rare opportunity. This incident didn't just clear your name, it's a chance to drive real change. I believe you should consider sharing your story." Nathaniel nodded thoughtfully. He understood that his experience wasn't just personal, it was a powerful tool for education and raising awareness about deeper societal issues. At the height of her isolation, Vivian received an unexpected email from Emily Walters, the very executive director of the Golden Foundation, the organization that had publicly cut ties with her. "Mrs. Hartley," the email began, "we would like to invite you to participate in an awareness and anti-discrimination program initiated by our organization. This is an opportunity for you to learn and grow. We hope you will consider this invitation." Vivian didn't respond immediately. Her initial pride made her want to reject the idea of making amends, but the mounting public pressure and her increasing social isolation began to chip away at her resolve. Shortly thereafter, Vivian was invited to a face-to-face meeting with Nathaniel Carter as part of the awareness program. In the office of a mediation organization, the two sat across from each other for the first time since the fateful flight. Vivian sat still, her expression a mix of anxiety and lingering pride. "Nathaniel," clad in his crisp military uniform, maintained his characteristic calm. "First of all," Vivian began, her voice trembling, "I want to say that I am truly sorry for what happened on the flight. I was wrong. I never thought things would escalate like this." Nathaniel studied her for a long moment before replying, his voice low and steady. "I'm not looking for an apology just to hear empty words, Mrs. Hartley. What I want to know is, do you truly understand the consequences of your actions?" Vivian was silent for a moment, then nodded slightly. "I thought I did, but maybe. I never really tried to see the situation from someone else's perspective." Nathaniel leaned forward, his gaze piercing. "This isn't just about what you said. It's about how you used your power and privilege to try to harm me and even threaten my career. But it's bigger than just me. It reflects the prejudice and injustice that so many others endure every day." For the first time in her life, Vivian had no defense, no justification. She could only sit and listen. After the meeting, she agreed to participate in the Awareness and Anti-Discrimination program. Nathaniel, meanwhile, began taking part in social campaigns to raise awareness about equality and combat discrimination. His story was shared on national platforms, sparking a wave of strong support. The truth had come to light, and while Vivian Hartley faced not only public condemnation but also deep personal consequences, Nathaniel found himself standing at a crossroads. He now had the opportunity to turn this incident into a larger mission for societal change. But would his sense of forgiveness allow him to pave the way for reconciliation? The next steps in this journey will reveal everything. Stay tuned for more profound developments and share your thoughts in the comments below. Continue following the story to uncover the meaningful lessons it has to offer. After her meeting with Nathaniel Carter, Vivian Hartley felt as if a heavy weight had been placed on her shoulders. Nathaniel's candid but profound words lingered in her mind. This was no longer about saving face. She was forced to confront the deep-seated prejudices that had shaped her worldview. Vivian began attending the awareness program organized by the Golden Foundation. The program included workshops, group discussions, and courses on the history of racial inequality, the various forms of discrimination, and how individuals could contribute to dismantling invisible barriers. In the very first session, Vivian listened to heartbreaking stories from people who had endured discrimination. A young black woman shared, "Do you know what it feels like to be dismissed solely because of your skin color? They don't say it outright, but you can see it in their eyes, the doubt, the judgment I have to live with every single day." Vivian lowered her head, unable to respond. Each story felt like a mirror reflecting her own actions. Yet, she remained silent, choosing to observe and listen. As the weeks passed, Vivian began engaging more actively in the discussions. She stopped avoiding the difficult questions and gradually admitted to the flaws in her thinking. During one session, when asked why she had acted the way she did on the flight, Vivian responded, "I think I grew up in a world where everything followed unspoken rules. I valued status and power so much that I assumed only people like me deserved to be in spaces like first class. But I was wrong. I didn't just insult Nathaniel, I insulted the worth of others as well." The facilitator, a seasoned social activist, nodded. "Acknowledging the issue is the first step. But change isn't about words, Mrs. Hartley. You need to act." While Vivian embarked on her journey of transformation, Nathaniel Carter used his personal story as a catalyst for societal change. He participated in numerous workshops, forums, and media programs, sharing his experience not only to clear his name but also to challenge people to think critically about their own biases. At a social equality conference, standing before a packed audience, Nathaniel delivered a speech that resonated deeply. "What happened to me on that flight wasn't an isolated incident. It's something that many people of color face every single day. But instead of letting it discourage me, I chose to use it as motivation. Any one of us can make a difference if we're brave enough to face the truth and take action." Nathaniel's words were met with thunderous applause. He had become more than a symbol of resilience. He was an inspiration for others battling injustice. As Vivian continued her journey of self-awareness and Nathaniel worked to effect change on a broader scale, their separate paths began converging toward the shared goal of fostering understanding and equality. Their respective actions were shaping a narrative of transformation, both personal and societal. After months of participating in the program, Vivian was invited to join Nathaniel at a seminar on awareness and personal accountability. This marked the first time they would meet again since their initial encounter. Standing on stage, Vivian scanned the room, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes watching her. This time, however, she was ready. First, she began, her voice trembling but sincere. "I want to apologize not just to Mr. Carter, but to everyone who has ever been hurt by my actions and words. I was wrong. But I've come to understand that an apology isn't enough. True change requires action." Nathaniel, standing beside her, gave a small nod of encouragement. When it was his turn to speak, he addressed the audience with steady confidence. "Forgiveness isn't easy. But if we want society to change, we must give each other the opportunity to make amends. I stand here today not to dwell on the past, but to remind everyone that we all have the power to create a better future." The room erupted in applause. The combination of these two individuals, one who had made a mistake and one who had endured its consequences, created a moment of profound impact. After the seminar, Vivian committed herself to using her voice and resources to support organizations promoting equality. She donated millions of dollars to scholarship funds for people of color and funded educational programs aimed at combating discrimination. In a televised interview, Vivian said, "I can't change the past, but I can use my mistakes to educate and inspire. If my story can help even one person rethink their beliefs, then I believe I've done the right thing." The journey of Nathaniel Carter and Vivian Hartley wasn't just about a single flight. It was about how we as people can learn from one another, correct our mistakes, and work together to build a more just and equitable world. Their story is not just a personal lesson, it is a powerful message about the potential for change and the collective effort to create fairness. To help share impactful messages like this, we need your support. Subscribe to the channel so you won't miss other inspiring stories. Share this story with friends and family so everyone has a chance to reflect and grow. Share your thoughts in the comments section. We want to hear from you. Your voice is an important part of this journey. Every action you take motivates us to continue telling meaningful stories that change perceptions and bring positive value to the community. Together, we can inspire change and build a better world.